How do I blur the background in portraits is one of the most frequently asked questions in photography. The answer is pretty easy. My name is Amri, and in this video I'm going to tell you the 5 factors of background blur. You have surely seen those beautiful images where the subject separates really well from the background. Reason being is that the background is totally out of focus while the subject is tack sharp, giving the impression the subject is even sharper than it really is. But how do we blur the background as much as possible? There are 5 factors. Let's discuss them one by one. But before we start, let me introduce you to Esther, who will be our model for this lesson. Thanks for helping out, Esther. So much for politeness. Here are the 5 factors of background blur. For this example, I'm going to shoot with the great dedicated portrait lens, the Sony 85mm f1.4 G Master. The very large aperture that I can get when I shoot with this lens wide open, or in other words at the lowest aperture number, will show this effect best. I will start wide open and then I slowly close the aperture with this awesome aperture ring. Let's have a look. As you can see, the background gets gradually sharper as I close the aperture. Let's compare an image shot at the lowest f number of this lens, which is f1.4, to the largest f number, f16. You can clearly see the lower the aperture number, the more blur you get. And then let me just show you an image from another video where I compared lenses for portrait use. Let me compare f1.8, which is an aperture you will only find in so-called prime lenses, for example the famous and affordable Nifty 50, with f5.6, which is the lowest setting on most cheaper zoom lenses, like the kit lenses that most of you buy with your first camera. Now let's look at f1.8 again. See how well the model separates from the background, making it actually look sharper in general. So the aperture has a huge influence on background blur. The smaller the aperture number, the bigger the background blur. Background blur factor number 2, the focal length. The longer the focal length of your lens, the more background blur you will get. I will use this 70-200mm f4 zoom lens. Let's see what happens if I start at 70mm and zoom into 200mm, keeping all other settings the same. Look at this image shot at 70mm and then the shot at 200mm, which clearly has much more background blur. Okay, but you may say that's a completely different image because the composition has changed. And that's true. But what if we keep Esther's size in the frame the same and step back while we zoom in? And here is the result. First with 70mm, and then I stepped back and zoomed into 200mm. Again, you see there is quite a difference. So the focal length has a big influence on background blur. The longer the focal length, the more blur. So far, we hit kind of technical aspects. Let's get on to the more compositional factors of background blur. The distance from the model to the background also has a big influence on background blur. Let me quickly stop this program in my own interest. This course is free. If you like what you saw so far, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to help me rank higher up in the YouTube search. And if you want to support me in continuously creating high-end videos, please consider making your next purchase from one of the links I provide in the description. It doesn't cost you a cent and it will give me some affiliate earnings which I can use to create more content. And if you like one of these t-shirts, I have created a web shop for photography shirts, so check it out. Let's start our shot with Esther very close to the background and then we will slowly move away. You see, the further away we get from the background, the more blur it will get. Let's compare this shot where the background is right behind Esther with this shot where it is about 30 feet away. So the further the background from your subject, the more background blur. Our fourth factor also has to do with distances. This time it is the distance from camera to subject that makes the difference. And this one is pretty dramatic too. I will take a long focal length, take one shot, then I get closer and take another shot. If we compare the shot from further away with the one shot closer, we see that the background is more blurred the closer we get to our subject. But of course, this will also change our composition because our model is much bigger in the frame. If we want a similar composition again, we need to zoom out while we get closer. Let's compare the one from further away but zoomed in. Remember, that was the longer focal length, with another one closer but zoomed out. So a shorter focal length. What we see is that the one with the longer focal length beats the closer one in regard to background blur. So focal length, which is background blur factor number 2, is more important than the distance to the subject. Those were 4 of the 5 factors, and those are the ones that you can easily change. Before we get to the 5th, let's recap. You can blur the background more if you use a lower aperture number, use a longer focal length, get your subject further away from the background, and bring the camera closer to your subject. And now for the next factor. That is particularly interesting for people who have camera buying decisions coming up. Our 5th and last effect is another technical one. It has to do with the size of your sensor in your camera. So nothing that you can easily change. Let's compare 3 cameras. First of all, a so-called full frame camera, then a crop sensor camera, and finally the iPhone 11. If you want to know more about sensor sizes, we have a video that explains exactly that. The iPhone has an equivalent focal length of 52mm and an aperture of f2. So I will use a very similar 55mm lens on the other 2 cameras and use f2. Let's shoot a portrait with each of them and compare the image. Okay, I made a mistake. I forgot to set the smartphone to telephoto lens. So we need to reshoot those images and you need to live with me as a model instead. Here are the images one after the other. Full frame versus crop sensor. Here the difference isn't all that great, but visible. With the crop sensor, I had to step back to get the same composition. If you wonder why, let me again recommend our crop versus full frame video. And finally, the smartphone shot. Big difference. So the sensor size is background blur factor number 5. And now I recommend watching our lens and background blur comparison for portraits.